Hello, witchy people. You may be wondering why I'm sat here in the dark with nothing but a cup of coffee, a solitary lit candle, and a snoring dog to keep me company. Well, many years ago, I used to run a website called The Haunted ChaCha. And on that site, I would write down the tales that people had told me, not necessarily ghost stories, just tales of strange happenings, weird goings on in strange places, eerie places, places that were supposedly haunted, maybe. So if you want to hear a few, grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and I'll tell you some. This story is called Night Nurse. In 1856, Florence Nightingale was absolutely disgusted with the way hospitals were run and operated during the Crimean War. She went to see Queen Victoria, and Queen Victoria in 1856 commissioned the building of Netley Hospital. It was the longest hospital to be built. It was huge. All that's left of it now is the chapel in Royal Victoria Country Park. The rest of the building was actually demolished in 1966. During the demolition, many workmen came up with some pretty scary stories. Like I said, now it's just the chapel. Inside the chapel is a small museum. When it very first opened, Ray, a friend of mine, and his friends went to go and visit. They did so in the dead of night and decided that, although it wasn't finished yet inside, they would break in to the chapel, the museum, and have a look around. So very, very late one night found them giggling, slightly boiled up by alcohol, no doubt, trying to get into the chapel. As I said, it was still under construction. They hadn't finished the inside of it yet. Ray actually managed to find an open door at the back of the chapel. This is the side of the chapel that faces away from the water's edge. He opened the door and went inside. And he said it was actually pretty amazing. There were figures, dummies, especially one of a grey dressed lady with a white pinafore over the top of her grey dress. Now, none of the figures moved. They were obviously dummies. But as Ray left the building and then turned round as he closed the door, the figure in the grey dress had moved. Ray assumed that it was his friends playing a trick on him. Well, they sat outside the chapel, the museum, until the following morning, drinking cheap cider, really being quite annoying, I suppose, or at least it would have been annoying if they had been near any local residents. But the chapel is actually quite central in the Royal Victoria Country Park, so they weren't really disturbing anybody. About 7:30 that morning, the groundskeeper wandered over and asked them what he thought, what these boys thought they were doing. Rather sheepishly, they stood up and admitted that they'd been there all night drinking. Ray then actually admitted that he had really, rather naughtily, broken into the chapel and had a look around. "Your museum exhibit is amazing," he said. "The dummies are brilliant, especially the lady in the grey dress." The groundsman looked at Ray strangely, and he said in his broad Hampshire accent, "You're having a laugh, aren't you?" Apparently, the exhibit hadn't been moved in yet. There were no figures, wax figures, dummies or otherwise. It was empty. And to prove the point, the groundsman took Ray to the back of the building where he said he had entered through an unlocked door, and unlocked the door that was in fact locked, and let him in. And sure enough, it was empty, completely. There are a few interesting things about the Grey Lady of the chapel. Some people say the ghost, the Grey Lady ghost that's seen there, is a Florence Nightingale. Others not so sure. She was actually fiercely opposed to the way that the Netley Hospital had been built, but unfortunately she was away nursing in the Crimean War when the plans were already put forward and the footing of the building had been laid. So she didn't have any say in how the hospital was built, and that she wasn't too happy about. Other people say that the ghost is that of a nurse, and that she died for one of three reasons. She was in love with a patient, and she wasn't allowed to be, and so she died. She killed herself. A second story says that she was in love with a patient, and the patient died, and she could no longer bear the thought of living without him, and so she killed herself. Yet another suicide story is that she fell in love with a patient who told her that he was married, and yet they still had an affair, and she fell pregnant. Whatever story is true isn't known, but it's a pretty spooky place, day or night. The museum inside Netley Hospital. This is D Wing inside the original hospital, and this is Skull Alley. All the photographs used during this video are of the Royal Victoria Country Park Hospital, which was originally Netley Hospital, except of course for the ones of Florence Nightingale. One other photograph I did use is from a ghost hunting trip, which shows orbs in the chapel. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.